morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection. We will begin today with our prayer of surrender. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it, I perceive it, and now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. Okay, we're almost to the middle of the month of June now, unbelievably, but I don't think I have mentioned as of yet our new theme in the devotional for the month of June. It is respecting the journey of others, which is an important thing to do. The title for our devotion today is How We See Each Other, which is a big determining factor to how we treat each other, part of which is respecting the fact that each of us is on our own journey. So let's get started. Here's the affirmation. What I see in others directly affects how they see themselves. I will reflect the positive in people back to them today rather than focus on any negative I see. All right, our teaching today is going to explore the concept that our thoughts are powerless to make us feel one way or another until we give them power or until we assign meaning to them. And our devotion is along these same lines. We are all connected, so especially in our formative years when we are children, much of our self-image is determined by what is mirrored back to us by our parents, by our teachers, and other people in our lives. So if what gets mirrored back to us is our good qualities and our accomplishments, then we will have a pretty healthy self-image. But if we're always having the negative aspects of ourselves mirrored and our behavior mirrored back to us, then we won't. We will tend to see only the negative about ourselves as well. All right, so let's read the text. Because we are all connected, how we see each other has the ability to affect big change in the collective consciousness. Now, let's stop right here and remind ourselves what the collective consciousness is. It is the reality that we all share that is constantly being created by all of our thoughts and actions as a group, as humanity as a whole. So here's how that works. Back to the text. It's a little like putting grains of sugar in a glass of water. If you put one grain in, it will dissolve. If you put another in, it will dissolve too. But if you keep putting in enough individual grains of sugar, you will eventually reach the point of saturation. And once that happens, the very next grain of sugar you add will result in crystallized sugar inside the glass. Any one of us could be that final grain of sugar that crystallizes the awakening of our entire species. So that's what I was talking about a minute ago. Because all of our individual thoughts and all of our individual actions contribute to the whole of our shared reality, then any one of those individual thoughts or actions could be the one that shifts the balance of the collective and changes the course of where we're headed as a species. So never think what you do or even what you think doesn't matter. Once more back to the text. So if we practice seeing each other in our wholeness rather than focusing on each other's negative aspects, we actually create a positive feedback loop that grain by grain, as it were, builds a bridge for others to step across more fully into their wholeness. Or in other words, if we focus on their wholeness, it makes it easier for them to focus on it as well. But when we choose to tear others down, we are only hurting ourselves. Conversely, when we help others and lift them up, when we see the best in them, we are actually doing it for ourselves. We are helping to saturate the universe with wholeness and goodness, crystallizing our collective enlightenment. Okay, that was some good stuff. So let's say the ending prayer together now. Spirit of connectedness, help me know today that when I see and encourage the good and wholeness in others, I am making it easier for them to see the same in themselves, as well as promoting the well-being of all mankind. Amen. Okay, deep breath in. And let's say our connection affirmation. I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in thought, word, and deed. So for the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, which is basically the power of choice and free will each of us has to decide about the things in our lives, the power to say yes, as well as the power to say no. Last week, we talked about the power and the energy of saying yes, specifically the yes and principle. So today, to bring a little balance, we're going to talk about the sacred no. And I only have one quote for you, and it is this: no thought has any power. You have power. And when you identify with and believe in the thought, you give power to the thought. And that was by a man named Muji. Okay, so we talk a lot around here about not giving our power away. But sometimes you can say a particular phrase over and over again and still not understand what it really means. To understand this concept of giving or not giving away your power, you must start with the foundational belief that you, as we all are, made in God's image and likeness. Another phrase we say quite a bit that I don't think we fully understand sometimes is we are created by God, we are creative like God, and we are creating as God. So that's where our power comes from. Our connection to God and the fact that we are God in a very real sense. Our divine power has been there since the day we were born. That's been in us since the day we incarnated into a physical body. But until we recognize it, until we acknowledge the divinity within ourselves, we will be disconnected from our power. And being disconnected from our power results in us feeling powerless and in living in victimhood all the time. It's when we are unconscious and unaware of our power that we feel as if life is happening to us. The more we recognize, acknowledge, and connect with our divinity, the more we walk in our power, the less any outside force can affect us. And we'll talk more about that later on. But getting back to the quote, the only reason thoughts become things is because they are powerful. But where does their power come from? Where does the power of thought come from? It comes from us. When a thought arises in our mind, it is our decision whether or not to give it power. Because as the quote reminds us, thoughts in and of themselves have no power. They're like a car with no gas in the tank. It's the power we give them that fuels them. The power is within us, and we get to decide to whom and to what we give it. When we are living our lives unconsciously, it doesn't mean that we don't have the power or that we're not powerful. It just means that we give it away to whoever comes along whose power is stronger than ours. In its mild form, that manifests itself as us always feeling drained and exhausted because everyone we come into contact with is feeding off our energy. In its most extreme form, this is how people get sucked into cults. They are so out of control of their own energy that they are easy prey for cult leaders and people who want to take their power from them. So the first thing we need to remember is that we are powerful and we get to decide to whom or to what we give our power. We often do this in its simplest form, either by saying yes or no, as we've been talking about recently. We are constantly in the process of saying, yes, I will give my power to this person or to this thought or to this activity, or no, I will not give it any of my energy or focus. None of my power will be going to XYZ, whatever it is. So we're going to talk about saying no for a few minutes. And I want to go back now to my previous teachings of last week and the week before about saying yes and the power of saying yes, and remind you of a few little caveats that I made at that time, which is just a fancy way of saying exceptions. The first week that I talked about yes, I said this: no tends to feel heavier than yes. No is a stance you take that often needs defending, and it also signals resistance. No has a disconnecting energy. It takes us out of agreement or means that we do not agree with or support something. On the positive side, no can be a protection and lead to worthy questions. Often when you tell someone no, they immediately ask you, well, why not? When we're uncomfortable with no, we should consider why. Questioning why we're saying no is important. No is often combative and defensive, but what is it we're defending, and why are we fighting? Many times what we're defending is our ego. So that's what I said about no in the first teaching I did about the power of yes, and all I will add now is to say yes or correct. No shuts things down and disconnects, and unfortunately in this life there are things that need to be and that should be shut down and disconnected from. I also said no is a conversation ender. And again, very unfortunately, but nonetheless true, there are some conversations that just need to be ended. And so there is indeed an appropriate time and place to say no. But as was also pointed out in the passage I just read, it's important that you're very clear on why you're saying no, that it's not coming from your ego or in defense of your ego. It's also not good when you just say no reflexively to everything. When everything is an automatic no first until someone talks you into a yes. I'm sure pretty much all of us, maybe not Lard, but the rest of us in here, maybe not KO, are old enough to remember that commercial in the 70s about the little boy with the cereal that the brothers are sitting at the table and they say, let's give it to Mikey. And the other brother says, he won't eat it. He hates everything. And then when he eats it and he likes it, it's like, hey, Mikey, he likes it. So Mikey is that, don't be Mikey. Don't be Mikey where everything is just always reflexively, no, I don't like it. Okay. So in the balance of your life though, if you're living in a relatively healthy mind space, you should be saying yes a whole lot more than you're saying no. But regardless, sometimes no is necessary. Such as in situations like this that I talked about in the second teaching that I did on yes. I said then, when I was talking about the yes and rule, when you say yes and then add more information, you don't have to say yes and to anything that's racist or sexist or dangerous or that makes you uncomfortable because it goes against your personal values and morals. Okay, so side note here, in order to know that, you've got to be clear on what your morals and values are and that they are worthy of being defended. So no means no. And it is a powerful tool to shut things down. It is always your right to say no to anything that's abusive on any level. But other than that, yes and is a good rule to follow in life as well as on the improv stage, which we talked a little bit about last week. That was from the second teaching I did. But again, you've got to be mature enough to know the difference between abuse and something you just don't like because you're not getting your way. That's why I personally have a bad taste in my mouth when I hear people talk about their personal boundaries, because I have heard so many people say that when what they actually mean is, I don't want to change this bad behavior I have. So if you don't like it, I'm just going to set a personal boundary with you. That's not what setting boundaries is supposed to be about. They're not about cutting everybody out of your life who disagrees with you. That's just immaturity. Boundaries are a form of protection from a legitimate harm, not just hurt feelings because someone dares to have a different opinion than you. Okay, so as you can probably tell, the whole subject of personal boundaries is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. So moving on. Something that can cause legitimate harm is a toxic relationship. And this is not limited to romantic relationships. You can have a toxic relationship with a family member or a friend or an employer or a neighbor or a coworker. And I'm careful to say a toxic relationship rather than a toxic person, because I don't believe anyone is toxic inherently. I believe people have toxic habits and behaviors and characteristics, but those are just a reflection of something inside them that is unhealed and that they have yet to deal with. I don't believe anyone should be referred to as a toxic person. However, their interactions with you can be very toxic because everybody's not vibrating on the same frequency as you are, because we are all at different stages on our journey. Some people are still living very unconsciously, and therefore their actions are going to be toxic and can be injurious to others. And that's one of the things that we can and should justifiably say no to in our lives: toxic relationships. So how do we do that in an appropriate manner? I'm going to read now from a piece by Dr. Christina Lopes called How to Deal with Toxic People in a Spiritual Way. And again, I don't personally like referring to people as toxic. She does, and I'll read it the way she wrote it. I believe only their behaviors, which can be changed if they choose to change them, are toxic. But she uses that reference here, so we will read the piece with that understanding. She begins, "What's a toxic person? The mainstream definition is someone whose behavior negatively impacts your life. Pretty simple. The easiest way to tell if you're dealing with a toxic person is if you feel heavy either while you are with them or after you leave their presence. From an energetic or spiritual perspective, they are generally people who have a very, very negative outlook on life." All right, so time out. They are in that unconscious state that we often talk about, where they have little to no understanding that it's their own thoughts that are creating their reality, and therefore they feel as if life is just happening to them. She goes on, "And the more negative their outlook on life is, and the more unconscious they are, the lower their level of vibration will be. That's why it feels heavy to be around them, especially if your vibration is higher. When we come into contact with their much lower vibration, it feels heavy and tends to bring us down. Spiritually and energetically, these people are like vacuums. They are constantly sucking energy from others because they are not generating any energy within themselves. Why? Because they have somehow lost their connection with the ultimate source of energy, God. They have cut themselves off or unplugged from that source, and so they now find themselves in the position of having to siphon off energy from everyone around them. Okay, some people call them something worse than a vacuum. Some people call these people spiritual vampires, okay? So I want to stop her for a minute. When she said that, it reminded me of that part in the movie Tombstone, where Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday are discussing Johnny Ringo, their enemy. And forgive me if you haven't seen the movie, you'll get it. You'll get the reference anyway. But if you haven't seen it, please do so. It's one of the greatest movies ever. So Wyatt is talking to Doc, and he says, "Doc, what makes a man like Ringo do the things he does?" And Doc says, "A man like Ringo has a great empty hole right through the middle of him. he can never kill enough or steal enough or inflict enough pain to ever fill it. Oh my gosh. Talk about profound lines in a movie. So when you're not awake and aware of your divinity and you're not connected to your source, you're empty inside, just like Johnny Ringo. All right, moving on. In a person with a healthy energy field, there is a flow of energy coming from source and moving through them and back up to source. And through our thanksgiving and our gratefulness and our praise, that's how we keep that flow going. When that connection to our source is flowing in a harmonious way, it's like our tank or our cup is constantly being refilled. And then we can give it out both to those around us as well as back to God. But when that flow is stopped up or disrupted in a person because of their unconsciousness, it creates a vacuum, a great empty hole right through the middle of them that can never be filled. As Doc was pointing out, it just keeps taking and taking and taking. Anytime you are taking more than you give, or the reverse, anytime you are giving out more than you receive, there is an energy imbalance that is created. And the people we're talking about today take more than they give. All right, so back to Dr. Christina. Some general characteristics and traits of toxic people are, just in case you're finding most people don't have trouble recognizing toxic traits in people, but just in case, number one is manipulation. All right. So anytime you feel like you're being manipulated, that's a toxic trait in someone else. Number two, people that don't respect boundaries. So as I've already said, I don't really like that word or that concept. The word boundary makes me think of a wall. And I tend to view the concept of setting boundaries as a defensive move, which denotes powerlessness. So I don't really like to talk a lot about setting boundaries, as I've told you on multiple occasions. I like to think and to speak of it like Dr. Kim Duramo does. She describes it as honoring yourself in the equation of your life. I think we spoke about that last week. So instead of saying that a characteristic of a toxic person is that they don't respect boundaries, I'm going to say they don't honor you. If someone is not honoring who you are, that's a toxic trait in them. All right, number three, surprise, surprise. They are extremely self-centered. They will always find a way to turn the conversation back to something that is about them. Number four, they are attention seekers. And this can be good attention or bad attention. They don't care which one as long as they are at the center of it, because attention equals energy. Number five, they tend to overpower others if they are allowed to. These are the people that are constantly trying to control the conversation or the activity or are talking over everyone else. So that's how you recognize them. The next question she asks and then answers is, can toxic people change? Many self-help gurus will say, no, they cannot. And their only advice to you is to get away and then stay away from these people. In other words, to cut them out of your life entirely. Now, I don't view things like this. This is Dr. Christina talking. She's saying she doesn't view things like this. Of course, we need to have compassion for these people. And of course, they are capable of change just as we are. But it must be a choice that they make. And what you must understand is that you are never going to be able to change them. Until this happens, until they decide to make this change, you have to decide what your level of interaction with them will be. Now, as I said a minute ago, not everyone is on the same frequency as you, but you don't have to cut them completely off. It is possible to have different levels of relationships with different people. That's what being mature is all about. There are some people who you just politely talk about the weather with, because once you get past that, the universe starts telling you, hey, this person is not a vibrational match for you at this time. But you don't have to put your walls up against them. You just have to know, you don't have to throw them out of your life. You just have to know your limits, just like with alcohol or, 2 drinks. That's it for me. I know that. I'm not going past that ever. Some people 2 sentences. That's it. That's my limit with you. So walls only need to be put up, as we said before, where abuse is involved, or if you realize you are being manipulated and drained. But there's also a way to fix that we're going to talk about a little later on. Right now, let's go back to our question. Can a toxic person, or as I like to say, a person who is exhibiting toxic behavior, change? And Dr. Christina says, one of the ways you can tell if a toxic person is making a change is their level of self-awareness. That's the first step toward changing, realizing that there's a problem and that the problem is you. All right, so this is similar to the story of Jonah. Jonah came to himself on that ship to Tarshish and realized he was the problem. He woke up from his unconsciousness and he told all of the others on the boat, hey, I'm the problem. I'm the reason for the storm because I am not where I am supposed to be. And when someone comes into that level of awareness, then there's hope, because that is the first step toward them changing. Okay. So then she talks about looking at a toxic relationship in your life from the standpoint of, what is this situation here to teach me? A toxic person, she says, in one way or another, is trying to show you and train you, as it were, into your own power. That is the key lesson, and what we must understand, that the best way to handle toxic people in our lives is as our teacher. They are training us how to be in our own power. Because the more you come into your own power and the more control you have over your own energy, the less they and their behavior will be able to affect you. Their biggest and best use to you is for you to understand the lesson they are presenting to you. So she then lays out a simple 3-step process for dealing with a toxic relationship. Here it is. Step number one, empowerment. The greatest lesson having a toxic person in your life teaches you is how to be in charge of your own energy and how to stay in and control your own power. You must learn not to give your power away to them. Don't allow them to force you to lose your cool or make you take on an emotional burden that is not yours. So some people I know went through this class to help them deal with their child who was going through a 12-step program. And this program was specifically designed for parents because it's extremely hard sometimes to watch your child struggle through things like addiction, and often they'll relapse, and you go through it right along with them. But at that point, until they change their behavior, even though they're your child, you have to realize that that's a toxic relationship that will drain you if you let it. So the advice to these parents to keep them from taking on their grown children's issues was to have 3 basic answers ready when the kids would try to burden their parents with the inner work that they should be doing for themselves. And those 3 answers were in the form of A, B, C. A, awesome. If they told you some good news, all you say is awesome. Don't elaborate. Or if they tell you something bad, instead of trying to fix it, the B is bummer. I'm so sorry that happened, but don't jump in and try to fix it. And C, cool. Like, that's cool. So those answers are the 3 answers, maybe that's your level of interacting with them at that point. So the reason step 1, which is empowerment, is so important and why you need to learn to empower yourself is because if you just decide to cut that person off without learning the lesson they came to teach you, another toxic person will come along, guaranteed. And you'll just have to keep cutting more and more people off. And pretty soon your circle will become very small until you learn the lesson that all of these people are coming to try to teach you. So that's step number 1, empowerment. Step number 2, create strong boundaries. So I think we've been through this sufficiently. When you create boundaries, just make sure it's not defending your own ego. Make sure there's really some abuse that you're needing protection from. And then, this is key, say no firmly, but without judgment. Don't apologize for saying no. Just say, no, this is not right for me, or this will not work for me at this time. But don't then add any judgment of them about it. Okay? We all change at our own pace and in our own space. Just because you say no to someone doesn't make that person unworthy or any worse than you. You're just not at the same place on your journey as they are on theirs. When we say no without judgment, we are creating life from a place of non-resistance. In this space, we are able to bless people as they continue on their journey. But when we are in resistance and judgment, we are sending a signal to the universe that there is something more we need to learn. And so the person, the problem, the obstacle, the situation must continue to persist and exist as long as we continue to resist. But when we can step back and genuinely say, I bless you. You're just not a vibrational match for me at this time. So I'm going to have to limit the extent of our interactions. That is very difficult to do with people you really love. It's a tough thing to realize that you're just not on the same vibrational frequency as a child or a parent or a sibling or even a spouse or a longtime friend. But here's the beauty of saying no firmly but without judgment. When you honor yourself and where you are on your journey, when you are so connected to Source that you have been able to recognize your divinity and access your power to the degree that you're strong enough to walk away if necessary, which is step 3 of Dr. Christina's, then you're not only protecting your own energy, you're helping the other person as well. Because a lot of times these toxic relationships involve codependency. And part of the reason the other person isn't dealing with their toxic behavior and characteristics is because you keep allowing that behavior, or you keep jumping in to save them, okay? You keep giving and giving and giving them your energy, and therefore they have found in you a seemingly endless supply. So what is the incentive for them to try to begin to heal the parts of themselves that are causing them to live on this low unconscious level? They don't have any because they've got all of this energy coming to them from you. But once that ready supply of energy they've been used to getting from you is cut off, they have no choice but to look at themselves. Now, unfortunately, sometimes they'll just find someone else and start draining them of their energy. But sooner or later, hopefully, they will be able to look in the mirror and become self-aware. But even if they don't, it's not your issue anymore. You have all of your energy back intact. So that's the best case scenario, is you saying no to this person and not giving them access to your energy anymore, which will help them see themselves a little better and eventually come to themselves and begin their own process of awakening. So, as I said, that was step 3 from Dr. Christina Lopes, is walk away if necessary. But how you do this is important. Just like how and why you create boundaries is important. In my opinion, and in my personal experience, whenever I've had to say no to a relationship because I feel it has become toxic for me, I like to leave the door cracked open just a little. Now, that might not be the smartest thing, and it might not be what the experts advise, but if a person really means something to me, but they're just behaving in a toxic way to the point where I find it necessary to walk away, I don't tell them so, but in my heart, I always keep that door a little cracked just in case they do decide to make some changes. I don't like to burn bridges. There are very few relationships in my life that are not active now that I could not return to if I wanted to. And maybe that's just me. Maybe that's because I just have a mama's heart. But even in the worst situations, I find that it's best for my mental and spiritual health to always hold out hope for the best, okay? And that might not be your experience, but that's how I deal with it. There's an old song by a 70s group called Bread, and the lyrics say, incorrect grammar notwithstanding, it don't matter to me. Is anybody familiar with that song? It don't matter to me if you take up with someone who's better than me. But this is the part I want to get to. It says, it don't matter to me if your searching brings you back together with me. because there'll always be an empty room waiting for you, an open heart waiting for you. Time is on my side because it don't matter to me. How many times have I cried over that song? Okay. So keeping your heart open and hoping for the best, even if you've had to walk away from someone, is always the way to go in my book, because people can and do change. So who among us has not had some toxic behavior in our life at times? But we've changed and we've grown, so we've got to allow others the opportunity to do the same. But it's important to remember that you can't change them, and constantly allowing them to drain you of your energy and giving your power away to them is not helping you, and more importantly, it's not helping them. It's just like continuing to tie shoes for a kid, like when they're way past the age that they should be able to tie their own shoes. Sometimes they're not going to learn until you stop doing it for them. So sometimes a no without judgment and walking away because you honor yourself and know how to protect your own power is the best thing and the only thing you can do for them. And nobody addresses this idea better than Eckhart Tolle. So I'm going to end today by reading a few excerpts from his book, The Power of Now, that I feel perfectly summarize all that I talked about and what the sacred no really means. And then at the very end, I'm going to read from a devotion that I wrote about the same thing. He says, ego is the unobserved mind that runs your life when you are not present as the witnessing consciousness, the watcher. Now, this is why people develop toxic behaviors right here. Listen to this. The ego perceives itself as a separate fragment in a hostile universe with no real interconnection to any other being, surrounded by other egos which it either sees as a potential threat or which it will attempt to use for its own ends. The basic ego patterns are designed to combat its own deep-seated fear and sense of lack. They are resistance, control, power, greed, defense, and attack. Some of the ego's strategies are extremely clever, yet they never truly solve any of its problems, simply because the ego itself is the problem. When egos come together, whether in personal relationships or organizations or institutions, bad things happen sooner or later. Drama of one kind or another in the form of conflict, problems, power struggles, emotional or physical violence, and so on. This includes collective evils such as war, genocide, and exploitation, all due to mass unconsciousness. Furthermore, many types of illness are caused by the ego's continuous resistance, which creates restrictions and blockages in the flow of energy through the body. Okay, so what did we talk about earlier? People begin exhibiting toxic behavior when their flow of energy gets stopped up, when the balance of give and take in their life with others and with source is not equal. When you reconnect with being and are no longer run by your mind, you cease to create those things. You do not create or participate in drama anymore. When you live in complete acceptance of what is, that is the end of all drama in your life. Did you ever think about that? When you just decide you're not going to participate or resist, there's no drama. Okay? When you just always accept, okay, this is what it is. Doesn't mean you like it or that you're not eager for more, but you just accept, okay, this is what it is, because resistance keeps it in place. Nobody can even have an argument with you, no matter how hard he or she tries. You cannot have an argument with a fully conscious person. An argument implies identification with your mind and a mental position, as well as resistance and reaction to the other person's position. The result is that the polar opposites become mutually energized. These are the mechanics of unconsciousness. When you are not in judgment, you can still make your point clearly and firmly, but there will be no reactive force behind it. no defense or attack, so it won't turn into drama. So that's like, the parents who say their child comes, no, and then they just walk away. There's no need to explain. There's no need, because then there's no art. It's just no, end of statement. It's just that, let your no be no judgment, just no. When you are fully conscious, you cease to be in conflict. No one who is at one with himself can even conceive of conflict, states A Course in Miracles. Somebody says something to you that is rude or designed to hurt. Instead of going into unconscious reaction and negativity, such as attack, defense, or withdrawal, you let it pass right through you. Offer no resistance. It is as if there is nobody there to get hurt anymore. That is forgiveness. In this way, you become invincible through your vulnerability when you keep your heart open. Remember, we talked about that a few weeks ago too. You can still tell the person that his or her behavior is unacceptable if that is what you choose to do, but that person no longer has the power to control your inner state. You are then in your power, not in someone else's, nor are you run by your mind. Surrender is perfectly compatible with taking action, initiating change, or achieving goals. But in the surrendered state, a totally different energy, a totally different quality flows into your action. Okay, when I was reading this, I thought about that song that I love that we sing. Richard Smallwood wrote it, Trust Me. And one of the parts that we kind of don't like to sing anymore is that part that says, I'll fight your battles, because we kind of look at it as, no, God doesn't fight our battles for us. But if you just shift that perspective a little, yes, in that surrendered state, when you surrender, yeah, it's like God is fighting your battle, but through you, because you have surrendered to whatever the intuition or advice or knowledge is, that because higher self, God's source, always knows the best way to approach something. So instead of you reacting and fighting, it's not like you give up and say, okay, God, you're just going to have to do this for me. No, for you and through you are two different things. And that's what he's saying here, is that in our surrendered state, we can more easily take care of it. Doesn't mean we're just give up. We still take action, but it isn't from a surrendered state. Surrender reconnects you with the source energy of being. And if your doing is infused with being, it becomes a joyful celebration of life energy that takes you more deeply into the now. Through non-resistance, the quality of whatever you are doing or creating is enhanced immeasurably. The results will then look after themselves and reflect that quality. We could call this surrendered action. To surrender is the most important thing you can do to bring about positive change. Any action you take is secondary. No truly positive action can arise out of an unsurrendered state of consciousness. Remember, any action you take, which includes setting boundaries, saying no, and walking away, may not bear fruit immediately. Until it does, do not resist what is. If there is no action you can take, and you cannot remove yourself from the situation either, then use the situation to go more deeply into surrender, more deeply into the now, more deeply into being. When you enter this timeless dimension of the present, change often comes about in strange ways without the need for a great deal of doing on your part. Life becomes helpful and cooperative. So then he here gives a word of caution. Do not confuse surrender with an attitude of, I can't be bothered anymore, which is what I was talking about earlier with people who set boundaries unnecessarily just because they don't want to be disagreed with or to look at their own behavior. So don't confuse it with that, and don't confuse it with, I just don't care anymore. Again, like I was talking about, keep your heart open. If you look at it closely, you will find such attitudes tainted with negativity in the form of hidden resentment, which is not surrender at all. Say no firmly, but with no judgment, to people who exhibit toxic behavior. They are cut off from their being and from source. So they unconsciously attempt to get energy and power from you. It is true that only an unconscious person will try to use or manipulate others, but it is equally true that only an unconscious person can be used and manipulated. Translation: people can only take your power from you if you give it to them, if you decide to get down and vibrate on their level. If you resist or fight unconscious behavior in others, you become unconscious yourself. But surrender doesn't mean that you allow yourself to be used by unconscious people. Not at all. It is perfectly possible to say no firmly and clearly to a person, or to walk away from a situation and be in a state of complete inner non-resistance at the same time. When you say no to a person or a situation, let it come not from reaction, but from insight, from a clear realization of what is right or not right for you at that moment. Let it be a non-reactive no, a high-quality no, a no that is free of all negativity and so creates no further suffering. And that, from Eckhart Tolle, my friends, is the definition of the sacred no. So several months back in May, we did a devotion that was called Just Say No. And I want to just read it to end the service today because, again, I think this perfectly says what a sacred no is. Saying no can be positive sometimes. For instance, when you know your own self-worth and you find yourself in a situation where it's not being recognized by others. This is the no Rosa Parks felt on the bus that day. It's the no black men felt as they carried signs saying, "I am a man." It's the no the prodigal son felt when he, the son of a prominent and influential man, looked around and realized he was living and eating with pigs. It's the no every addict feels when they realize an addiction has taken over their life, changed everything about them, and they finally say, "No more." It's the no you feel when you're tired of living every day with the disempowering thought patterns of fear and negativity, and you make a decision right then and there to make a change. This kind of no begins an emotional chain reaction and sets into motion an energetic shift within you that ripples out through every part of your life. Learning to say no appropriately is just as important as learning to say yes. All right. Amen. Let's stand together and sing our ending song. And as always, join us tonight. Join my brother tonight at 9:30 for his broadcast. And then Wednesday night, 7:30, Friday morning devotion, and Sunday morning at 10.
Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen. Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen.
See you next week.